And yeah, moving right along. Well, this is an interesting story you've come up with here, Cam. Chris Paciello was actually born Christian Ludwigsen. So he's a German, but I think you told me that his mother's maiden name was Paciello.
Right. Yeah.
You know, we see that all the time. Germans and Irish and Italians all go to the Catholic Church. And so they meet each other at the church and they intermarry. I've got several friends that are part German and part Irish, and I ran into more than one Italian guy who was part German. I mean, part German or part Irish and part Italian.
Be me.
So
it'd be me.
Be you.
That's my mother's family were Italian and Irish. We went to the. We're in the same orphanage coming up.
Yeah, there you go. Well, they met through the church in some manner.
That's right.
That Catholic Church is like it is a thread that runs through this country like you can't believe. As I look at it, I'm English and a Presbyterian, raised a Presbyterian, and I've always marveled at the thread that the Catholic Church has and the connections that are made and how people get together. It's all based in and around the church, but that's that's the way it is. He was raised in the borough park of Brooklyn, and real close. I think he got down here just north of Bensonhurst, which is mob territory there, man.
Yeah, a lot of Hasidics in Borough Park, but there's still a lot of Italians. So.
Yeah, but that Bensonhurst, that's Gotti country there.
Yeah, that's where all the Italians in Brooklyn were. Everybody came from Bensonhurst.
So his father was a drug addict and a car thief, and was really kind of removed from the family, that will kind of help you make sense out of our friend Chris as he gets older. Eventually, he'll take on her maiden name Paciello when they moved into one of Brooklyn's Italian neighborhoods. It's probably safer for him, and he could fit in better as an Italian in those neighborhoods. And plus, if he's going to go on and be involved in crime and organized crime, why, they better have an Italian last name. He started out, all the rest of them. How many of these people that we talked about, Cam, they always start out as a small thief.
That's right.
Nick Savella, the boss in Kansas City, started out stealing tires. And one of the other mob guys, a guy named Tony Gizzo, who was kind of his mentor back when he was young, would buy those stolen tires from him. So he started out stealing car stereos at age 15, which that was a huge deal at one time.
Yeah.
He learned all about wiring and cars, and he then started stealing cars. He got connected up in his later teen years with something called the New Springville Boys. They were kind of a farm team for the mob, primarily the Colombo and Bonanno family. There's always these groups of organized young Italian kids that grew up in the same neighborhood, all went to the Catholic Church, were all altar boys together probably at one time, and they get to know each other, and they form these little gangs. I mean, that's in every city. We had it in Kansas City. We even had one more recent times that did a drug investigation, and we titled it, I think the FBI actually came up with the title, we titled it The Young Italians, because they were all the young guys who were in their 20s, early 20s up to 30, and they realized the money that was being made in cocaine. Now, they weren't very good at it because they all got popped. We turned a gal that they trusted early on in this thing, and she was integral in the deal, and we turned her, and she pretty much brought them all down. They weren't very successful in the drug business, which is why their dads and their grandpas said, don't get in the drug business, because then they got like 15 or 20 years at age 25. That's a long time to go at age 25.
Yeah, like the 42s were here in Chicago. I mean, the times were different, so they were a bit more, well, they were bigger and violent, but it was the same kind of thing, and the same thing was going on in New York also. Yeah,
they had the Gophers for the Irish. Was Oni Madden, or I think it was Oni Madden, or one of those other Irish guys. He was a member of the Gophers, and they were fighting other gangs, and they were going down. They were really pretty organized and stealing together.
5 Points is what Capone was in New York. 5 Points was a big one in New York.
Paciello was close with the Bath Avenue crew that was on the documentary series Inside the American Mob. If you saw that, it was on Discovery Channel first and then Netflix. The local crime families, Colombo and Bonanno, used these guys for all kinds of little jobs, arson, robbery, intimidation. They'd kick up to them just for the, be able to hang around. Even their drug dealing, they didn't let anybody know they were taking the drug money, but they took it. And they made those connections. And like you said, just like the 42 gang, that was like the farm team for the outfit in Chicago. In a little story about the 42 gang, supposedly they got that name not because of a street. You would think it would be because of a street. They all lived on 42nd Street or something. Because somebody said, we had Alibaba and the 40 Thieves back then, and they had two more than that. They had 42 thieves they felt like were in their gang, so they called themselves the 42 gang. They were two better than Alibaba and the 40 Thieves.
Right.
That was because back in those days, that was the 1930s, 1940s, maybe 1930s, they had a classical education, so they taught stories like Alibaba and the 40 Thieves and the Arabian Nights, and everybody had to take Latin in high school, that kind of thing, and studied more the classics rather than today. They sent them off to trade school more likely.
Yeah, and those would have been the stories they would have liked,
Yeah, really.
As kids.
So Cam, he gets a connection, one of his first connections to one of the mob wives. Tell me about that, this Lee Davanzano.
Lee Davanzano was, he was sort of the leader of the New Springfield boys. He was real fast riser in the area. He seemed to be really smart about how he did things, and you'll see that later on as Chris goes down one path, and Lee does not go to that extreme. But Lee would end up marrying. My wife is kind of a fan of the show, Drita Davanzano. She was a character, Drita, and Lee is in prison through most of the show. But so in this story, this is the first of two mob wives connections. I'll say that. But they become close, and Davanzano was a loan shark, and he only had a lot of money on the street. He said close to $100,000. I find that kind of hard to believe, but he had a hell of a lot of money, and he was at this time in Bensonhurst and around Brooklyn. That was real big Colombo and Bonanno territory. And so that's who they went back and forth with, the Bonannos and the Colombos especially. And the Bonannos were really in a period of strength at this time, the late 80s, during the late 80s and the early 90s, because the commission trial had just happened and basically wiped out everyone except Joe Messino, who had kept his guys pretty clean through all that because they had been kicked out of the commission anyway. So the Bonannos are really, really rising to power, so that's who these young guys turn to. So Lee sells guns, and Chris gets in with Lee. And one of the things that they do early on is they sell guns in this Colombo war that's starting up. You've got when Alibaba Persico was getting out of prison in around 91, and Vic Arena was the acting boss of the Colombos because Carmine Persico was in prison. Vic Arena didn't want to step aside for the nephew of the boss, and so they had an internal war. Greg Scarpa was on one side, he was on Persico's side, and he had a lot of deaths and all. And these kids in the New Springfield boys with Lee and Chris was in the middle of it. That's how they made a lot of connections higher up, is they were selling guns to the Persicos on both sides, but they got really close with the with Alley Boys side. And that would really define Chris's career going forward, is just from selling guns to the winning side of the Colombo War.
Interesting. I see that he also worked as a investigator for a mob lawyer back there in New York, a guy named Dennis Peterson. I don't know that, but he would later claim that Peterson was his father figure, which I think he didn't have a father. What's the deal with that?
Well, I think with his father being an addict, Peterson kind of looked out for him and would bail him out because these kids would get in trouble a lot. They were doing a lot of bad stuff. So Peterson, keep an eye on him. I think as an investigator, he would say, go check on this address or whatever. And from everything that I could read, it said that this guy Peterson really did look out for him and felt bad for the kid because he didn't have any family, and didn't really have a father, and so he did just give him a legitimate job working in his law firm. Peterson was a mob lawyer, so I don't, I think that he would sort of go check on these guys, or what do you know about these guys? He would use his street connections to sort of find out whatever information could help his clients. But Peterson was also a bit of a loan shark, and as Paciello got older, he used him to make collections. He did send him out and say, well, I'll give you some of this if you. And so he had this kid, even though he looked out for him, the kid was still going around making collections. He was probably muscling guys as he had to, and using his gang to break windows and whatnot. So there was that legitimate relationship between them, but he used the kid for what it was worth.
See, they got into stealing drugs from other people, which is pretty common for these young mob guys. I know we had a little crew here. They ended up just had a little flurry of activity about this. They found out they had a guy who was offering to buy a kilo of cocaine. They said, okay, and he was actually he was actually an FBI informant. So he was working off a case, and he had a big one. He's going to set up part of this little young Italians to buy a kilo of cocaine. And the guy walked in, one of the young Italians walked in, who happened to be actually Irish, member of that little crew. And he walked in the hotel room. The bureau had it wired up with video and audio. And the guy just pulled out a gun, just started shooting at the informant. And the FBI agent, he has to go out of his hotel room, which is right next door, and run into that one, and got in there and shot and killed the bad guy. Joe Riley was his name, shot and killed him. And actually, the informant didn't die. Riley wasn't a very good shot or something. He just popped him a couple of times and then didn't try to follow up with a headshot real quick. Or the agent got in there quicker. I don't know which. So that's pretty common. These young guys, and that guy from Detroit, Gunner, talked about that. And it's pretty common for these young kind of half mob connected guys. Frank Culotta talked about that out in Las Vegas, and Ernie Gambino. The Hole in the Wall gang, they'd get a tip on a drug dealer, and drug dealers are fair game for these mob guys. They got the balls. They'll go out and do them and take their money and their drugs because they got a way to get rid of the drugs. So that's pretty common. I see he got into doing that. And here's another connection with the mob wives. It's crazy here. Tell me about that one.
They're talking to a friend of Vanzano's is across the street. He's buying drugs for himself, and he sees these guys loading these bales out of a rental unit into a flat panel truck, and they're bales of marijuana. So he watches them load up. He follows them, and what they do is they park the vehicle in a location, and they get up and they leave the trucks, and they just pick it up. So he goes to a payphone. He calls Lee. He said, "Hey, you got to get down here, and if you got a guy who can steal cars, bring him on." So he calls up Chris, and they go down and they steal this truck, and they pull it into a warehouse that they know or somewhere, and they realize they've got a ton of stolen marijuana, a ton of marijuana. So they sell that, and Anthony Graziano, who is a capo in the Bonanno family, the father of creator of Mob Wives is Jennifer Graziano, and her sister Renee Graziano is the big star of the show. So this is their father. He would go on to become the consigliere of the family eventually. He calls him up and says, my daughters haven't made this TV show yet. I need some cash from you kids on the street. And he says, I want a piece of your act. I want 50 grand. So he gives it to him. He said, now, how much did you make on that? I know you made a lot of money. He said, 150,000. And, you don't shine on the mob guys. The streets talk. And he says, so he sends a guy, he said, get right with this kid. So he talks to him. He said, you're coming along, you're doing really well, and you want to be around for these momentous events in your future. You want to be here for things like weddings. Do your best to avoid the funerals, kid. Act right. So, those mob messages that they send.
Yeah, really.
So, but there you go. You've got Graziano and Drita Di Vanzano are both covered in this story. There's your mob wives.
Mob wives connection. I tell you what, that's an amazing phenomenon. But I watched one of those, like, oh my God. I know people like this. How do they live like that? I don't really want to watch them.
They tried the Chicago one, and it just
didn't that didn't work out at all. I read about that. I think it had Frank Sweet, some connection to him, as a daughter, and she'd be messed up. I mean, if you're raised by Frank Sweet, Frank the German, whew, man, having that dangerous and for a father, man.
Generally unbalanced father.
Yeah, really. I thought my upbringing was bad. I can't even imagine what that would be like. We just had to work like hell.
God.
Moving right along, I see that the new Springfield boys and our friend Chris went on into doing some armed robberies, bank robberies even. Man, these guys were going all out. Remember, I did that Andrew DiDonato when he was a young guy. And they made a hell of a score with the armored car robbery, I think. I think he said they hit it for $400,000. So,
oh my God!
If you're, I just did one on the trench coat bandits out of Kansas City. They were more peripherally connected to the mob. They didn't let the mob know how much money they were making, and they hit one bank out west for $4 million. They just got lucky. But if you do your planning right, you can make some really good money robbing banks. But you got to plan, and you got to have a crew. And it's the whole 9 yards, just like you see in the movies, the Point Break and the other caper shows, the Italian Job. You got to do it right, or you're going to go down pretty quick, and you're not going to make any money. You hit these banks like my friend, the Booty Hat Bandit from St. Louis. He didn't know what he was doing. He was getting, $3,000, $4,000 a bank. He robbed like 14 banks, just trying to keep his mortgage paid until he got caught. And he was a first timer. He got 25 years. They stuck it to him. Oh man, they did. And there's no, crime with a weapon in the federal system. He's about 14th year into, he's going to have to do about 23 or 24. He paid the price. So they start robbing banks, and
they were like 2021 doing this.
Wow. Were they pretty sophisticated, reasonably sophisticated?
Yeah, they used crash cars. They cased location for weeks. They learned who worked in the bank and when, and they checked on how the armored cars were delivered. So they would go in there. They did, I think, 7 or 8 banks over the 4 states. I guess you've got Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and maybe Rhode Island, but they did a bunch of banks, and they walked into one with a guy had fake bombs strapped to his chest, but they wouldn't walk into a bank and just randomly say, "Hey, I'm robbing the bank," like you said, because then you're just you might get a couple grand, because banks don't necessarily keep a lot of cash in them. But if you show up at the right time, you see when the armored car is coming and whatnot, apparently, and you get the right bank. We're advocating bank robbery, but these guys did all right. You're talking, they had several $300,000 jobs. They had a couple for over $1 million, and they really, in between that, they were involved in small robberies all over Brooklyn and New York. They were robbing everything from pet shops to video stores, and in between, they were in all the bars brawling and fighting with everybody, and that Jersey Shore sort of fist pumping stuff that you see.
Yeah.
If you saw that inside the American mob, like you were saying, those guys, was the Bath Avenue boys, and they talked about going crazy and just hog wild around the city, just young wannabe mobsters and they knew that they had to kill in order to become mobsters, so they all kind of had a real bloodlust. And Chris here was right in the thick of it. He was is dozens of little robberies, and the bank jobs were big. I think 7 of those, and the takes were from 300,000 to $1 million.
Yeah, see, he was always on the lookout. I noticed a section here on robbing a porn shop owner, more like a guy that owned a bunch of porn shops.
Yeah.
And those porn shops, they deal in cash back then, especially. I don't know if they do now, but a lot of people use cash in those porn stores, so they're going to have a lot of cash. That's like this marijuana business. I don't know if they've ever changed the federal law there for a while. Even the legitimate marijuana people had a problem with their cash because the banking systems, since it's illegal on a federal level and they're under federal law. I don't know if they figured out some way for them to take that cash or not, or all these medical marijuana and then the other states where it's totally legal for recreational purposes. There's a lot of cash flowing around out there. So this guy, the porn business, it would be a good opportunity. But a lot of them are connected to the mob, especially in New York. What was the deal with that? It looks like it's a Jewish guy.
I couldn't find. This is a pretty well-known incident. This Semi Shemtov. And I couldn't find if he was connected or not. There's a couple of weird things about this robbery. But so Paciello goes to a guy named Jimmy Calendra, who was in the Bath Avenue Boys. He's one of the main guys that they're interviewing on that Inside the American Mob. So he goes to Calendra and says, "Hey, I've got this job." He notices this guy, Shemtov, the porn store owner, is always using cash. He sees him around, and I guess they run in similar circles. And so Shemtov's always got cash. He figures he's got a safe. Paciello would later say that Anthony Spiro, a capo in the Bonannos, turned him on to Robin Shemtov, but Calendra, who was really tight with Spiro, never mentioned Spiro in that robbery. So anyway, they get together with a guy named Tommy Reynolds, and the plan is for Paciello to drive to the guy's house. Tommy Reynolds and Calendra, who are both big guys with the Bath Avenue Boys, will go in there and they'll rob this guy and do what they got to do to get him to show him their safe. Problem is Reynolds is getting big into the crack cocaine game. And that time, you know how big crack was. I mean, going through there, I mean, you were right in the thick of it. And so this guy was not only selling crack, he was sampling quite a bit of his wares. And so they show up, they jump out of the car, they run up, they knock on the door. This woman opens the door, she's 45 years old, opens the door. They're sort of taken aback. And Reynolds goes to put the gun up to threaten her and pulls the trigger and shoots her right in the face. Just kills her. And they don't know what the hell. Her daughter is there on the steps looking, just watching this all take place. She's 9 years old. And they just turn and run. They don't know what the hell. And Tommy was I guess he had been smoking crack all day. And so that was it. It turns out there was no safe. There was no cash in his house. Wherever Shemtov was keeping money, it wasn't home. So it was really not that there's ever any reason to do that, but it was a poorly searched job. And it sounds like if the mob were going to put something together, they would know that there was or was not cash in somebody's homes. So that was in 93, I think, in December of 93. So Paciello starts looking to get out of town. He's got to find somewhere out of New York because he knows he's got this hanging over his head. I mean, this was a major, if you look at the timeline of what Paciello did, this was when he sort of, I think I gotta skip town. And so he starts looking for opportunities. A friend of his, a guy named Michael Caruso, was in London during all this. He was a street guy too, and he was spending a lot of time in London. He was a DJ, and there's a burgeoning musical scene over there, the rave scene, electronic dance music. And there's a lot of drugs. That's where you see like ecstasy and ketamine and a lot of those club drugs that are really selling. And I think it's safer on the street level because you're just selling to little kids who aren't going to try and roll you for that. So Caruso thinks if he comes to America and sets up a European-style dance club with that thumping music and everything, that it would really fit in a place like New York, and that it's really the prime time for America for that kind of thing, sort of a British invasion, but brought over by a street guy from Brooklyn. So Paciello agrees with him.
Interesting. I kind of remember that scene kind of started back east. We didn't really get that much of it here in Kansas City. It took a while to make it here to Kansas City. But there was a lot of drugs going through those raves, and that's when ecstasy hit big time. And they got on that. I think it got so big that I noticed the Mexicans were making it down south of the border and bringing it back up, along with the cocaine and heroin. So it had to be big. That's about the time I think that was about the time I got out of the business and was probably a neighborhood policeman there at the end of my career. Actually, I was a aide almost to the major of Central Patrol, and we did a lot of community policing. I was kind of over it by then. I let the younger people do that by then, so I didn't really get too involved with
You had your fill?
that whole thing. I remember them having the big deals. They'd run these raves down in the West Bottoms in an old warehouse district, and they're trying to figure out where they were. Vice was always running around trying to figure out where this underground rave was. It was supposed to be so big, and they didn't find it. Then they'd get all kinds of calls from parents the next week about their kids getting all zonked out on drugs down at some rave in the West Bottoms. You better do something about it. So I see there he got involved with Mickey Rourke, which, boy, I tell you, that Mickey Rourke, he's a piece of work. I can see him getting involved with the mob.
Yeah. So Paciello decides he wants to get out of town, and Caruso's got the connections, and also he says, well, why don't we why set up clubs are starting to form in New York on their own. Why don't we do this in Florida? You know the people, and I've got some connections down in Florida, because Florida is where the mobsters go to retire. So they go down to Miami. At the time, Miami was not like it is now. I mean, in the early 90s, this was before Miami became a big club. I mean, there were a lot of drugs and everything, and from the cocaine wars. But Miami, as we think of it today, I guess, hadn't really evolved yet. This was the first dance club in Miami, and so Lee goes down there. I'm sorry, not Lee.
Chris.
Guys are running together. Chris goes down there with Caruso, and they talk to Mickey Rourke. They like the location of his club, and it turns out that this club is owned by the Gambinos. So they say, well, they put up all the money because he still got all his cash from his bank robberies, and all was kind of smart for a young guy. He didn't get into drugs too heavy that I could find, but he put all his bank robbery money into this club. And he said he called it risk because it was risky going in with the Gambinos, but he had to pay his lease up in cash, and if he couldn't pay the rest of it by a certain time, he had to just give it to them. And Lee Vanzano came in for $40,000 also with them, so they really thought they had something here, and it turns out they did. The club was really successful. You see pictures of him in the early 90s with Jennifer Lopez and Sofia Vergara, and Johnny Versace used to go to the club before he was killed. This was the spot in Miami, Risk, but you would see mobsters there too. It was just an open. I mean, this guy, he wanted everybody in his club because that's how you make money. He wanted the biggest loan sharks, the biggest mobsters, but he wanted the drag queens and everybody too. I mean, everybody who walked through the door was more money, and really created that Studio 54 environment that I guess he was going for. So he has the biggest club in Miami. He's making a ton of money. This kid's 25. He builds a second club down there. His house is $1.5 million right on the water. He's got a big boat. He's got all kinds of cars. He's hanging out with famous people down in Florida. He's really got a hell of a life down there. But of course, he's getting into fights and doing all his stuff down there. But what he's also doing, rather than leaning back from the life, is he's leaning into it. So he's leaning into that role of mobster club owner, and he's hanging out with mob guys down in Florida, and he's throwing big parties for them, and more mob guys are coming around him, and he's hanging around them. And Lita Manzano comes down and he says, this guy's hanging around with a bunch of sharks. He gets his initial investment back, and he tells his Caruso, he said, you better watch out for this guy. He's going to kill you for your part in the money. So even at this time, the people around Paciello didn't really trust him. And probably didn't trust each other that much, but there was a sort of a sense of brotherhood among these kids. But Paciello was really up in the ante who he wanted to go around with. He was getting in deep with as many gangsters as he could. So he opens his second club, and in early '96, he gets a call from the Colombos, Wild Bill Catolo. And Catolo says, you come from our neighborhood. We've got a history with you. You're on the record with us, period, now. And because one of the locations is owned by the Gambinos, they didn't really appreciate that. So there was a sit down, and Ali Boy Persico sort of speaks up for him. And when the acknowledged boss is on your side, then you kind of get what you want. And so he went with the Colombos. He was more or less a Colombo, and he became very close friends with Ali Boy Persico, who was several years older than he was. But they started hanging out down there. But he's really getting in tight with these guys who he used to sell them guns, and now he's running clubs for them.
I see him gave him a $5,000 Cartier watch. That's how you get in with a mob guy. You give him a $5,000 watch.
Right.
Of course, the problem is then they realize how much money you got, then they just want more.
Yeah.
They're like the crocodile. You start feeding them thinking they won't eat you, and what you're doing, you keep feeding them, but they're just going to eat you last.
Yes. Yeah, that is exactly right. So even when he's down there, he's riding around with Persico. They're just driving down the strip down there, and somebody cuts him off in traffic. He follows him down and rams the guy's car. He gets into another argument with somebody and hits a man with a baseball bat. So he's not growing out of the streets or anything. He's still who he is. You see, in 1999. No, May of 1999, Wild Bill Catolo disappears. That was a big murder. You see Bill Catolo's son on a lot of shows talking about it.
Yeah, I was contacted by him about wanting to do something. He and that Nicholas Christopher, I think, is an author that's written some mob books. I emailed him back and said, let's give it a shot. And then I never heard back from him.
Yeah, whenever I've seen him, he does a really good job speaking about things.
Yeah, I need to push him a little bit.
Guy. Yeah, that would be really good. You do really well with him.
But the dad disappeared. Was it one of those Lupara Blanca, a white shotgun?
Exactly. And I don't remember the ins and outs of it. I know that the Colombos were a lot like the Bonannos in that they were really killing each other a lot back then. This was it's 99. Would that have been after? The Persicos they were not involved in drugs as much as the other families. I don't think they were involved at all, but there was always a lot of internal strife in the Persicos. They did that kind of like a lot of families where the Gottis wanted to keep it in the Gottis, and so the Gotti uncles and all, and the patriarch, he tried to give it to his son, and that led to a lot of problems. And Persico tried to give it to his son, and that always leads to a bad situation. You try to keep the leadership in the family. So Paciello is arrested in November of 1999 on the Shemtov case. So Catolo disappears in May of '99. Then the police are able to get Shemtov. I think they get Tommy Reynolds and Jimmy Calendra. I guess this is really bothering Jimmy Calendra, is how Calendra tells it years later. So they arrest him in the shooting of this woman, Judith Shemtov.
So we're going back to the porn guy, Shemtov, and the murder of his wife. So that's starting to, murder will out, as my 7th grade teacher used to say. That murder's starting to come out for some reason. Somebody must have started talking.
That's right. And I couldn't remember what it was. I don't know if Calendra, I know Calendra ended up getting caught for something and Reynolds got caught for something. I can't remember the deal. Yeah. But so while he's in prison, he gets a $15 million bail. And that's more than John Gotti's was. $15 million on this Chris Paciello. And so Sofia Vergara puts up half of it. Another starlet down there puts up half. They put up their homes to get this guy out of prison. He gets real strict house arrest at his mother's place in Staten Island. So he has to go back up to Staten Island because that's where the trial's going to be. So he's up there. While he's in, though, this is where he makes a real agreement with law enforcement. I guess through the years, he would sort of drop hints, like a lot of them do, Gary, you know, trying to get over on the competition. They'll speak to law enforcement a little bit here and there. But this is where he's looking at murder. He's looking at a lot of stuff. He's the guy. So he agrees to speak with law enforcement on the record here in this arrest. So he comes to court, and while he's in court for this arrest is when he speaks to law enforcement. But the entire everything is sealed, and he was released. So I don't know why nobody picked up on why that was odd, but several people went away in this murder. Paciello was released. I guess he was just the driver. Maybe they figured that's why he got away with it. But so he's back on the street, and while he's in Staten Island, he hears this other guy, this Jerry Green Eyes Clemenza, bad-mouthing Cotolo. And a lot of people in Persicos were looking for who had gotten rid of Cotolo. So Paciello reports it to Persico, the boss. Persico says, okay, find him and I'll send a hitman. So here we have Paciello out on bond after he's awaiting his trial, driving on house arrest, driving around Staten Island, trying to find, he's following this Clemenza, trying to find where he's going to be so he and a Colombo hitman can take care of this guy. And they lose him in traffic. And when Paciello finally does make the agreement, he reveals that, yeah, I was trying to find this guy. The Colombos had me trying to kill him. So he immediately begins informing on at that level and basically everything. I mean, Paciello's got a lot to talk about. So shortly thereafter, Alley Boy Persico, the boss of the family, is arrested on a loan sharking trial, and they're going to require Paciello to testify in open court, which he did not like, but you got to do what you got to do. That was the agreement. So he testifies against the boss of the Colombos in open court, this guy who was good friends with him. And while he was there, he implemented this Dennis Peterson, this lawyer who was also sort of a father figure to him. And a lot of sources that I read said there wasn't really much need to do that. I think he threw that out as a bonus. Maybe he had bad feelings towards the guy. I don't know. But this Peterson, this mob lawyer, he climbs to the top of the building and jumps off of it. He kills himself. And I guess he had some other things going on too. But so this guy who showed Paciello a little bit of kindness, Paciello turns him in. Paciello is basically the quintessential mob guy. He turns on most everyone. But he did have lead to a lot of arrests. He led to guys who were arrested who eventually led to Joe Massino, the boss of the Bonannos. Paciello's work sort of set the dominoes going for a lot of big mob arrests during the early 2000s. So he really did bring a lot of guys down. When he was released, he changed his name back to Christian Ludwigsen, moves out to Los Angeles, and sets up a pizzeria, but it goes bust. He's floating around. He gets involved in a bunch of fist fights in the middle of the street, and every club he goes into, he gets into a brawl. First was a big cocaine smuggler. Second, he gets in a fight with all the like you said, the Jersey Shore type stuff, fighting with every bouncer in another place. And in 2012, he just says the hell with it, and he moves back to Florida. He's going by Chris Paciello again, and he's trying to open new clubs. And the last news I found of him was in February of this year. They were looking for beachfront property in Miami, which is all taken up by hotels and businesses now. So there's a small island where you can go off, and they're setting up a more sedate club where you can just sort of hang out at the pool and drink during the day. And he wants a more relaxed club now, but because of COVID, the attendance is not pretty good. And that was in February. He's a club owner going by his name, Chris Paciello, again, down in Florida. So I guess that shows you the state of the mob nowadays.
Really? Is this club called Rockwell? Is this one?
Yes.
It's called Night Spot. Was it
Yes.
Night Spot Rockwell or just Rockwell?
It's a Rockwell, yeah, and it's a little place called Watson Island.
It's Rockwell on Watson Island. So he's making the news and stuff again too. And
yeah.
if you Google him, you'll find some recent stuff. Where it seemed like I remember that from another story I did.
Yeah, they said he wanted to see if his name, because he was the big draw during the day. So they wanted to see if he came back, could he do it again?
Yeah.
Could he recapture that former glory? And apparently everybody who lives in Miami, all the Miami celebrities now who, their names you'd recognize, but they're just people who live in Miami. They all turned out for his new club opening in 2012. So
Wow.
He did not feel afraid of the Colombos back in 2012 that he opened his own club.
As you said, the state of the mob today, those guys are all over the place, that just living openly and not really taking many precautions, if any. I don't know.
Yeah.
I finally got that Michael DeLeonardo to come on the podcast. He was kind of open to me. I didn't put it out, but he was not trying to hide the approximate area where he was. I didn't put it out. I could have, because he said it, while I was recording. I just cut that out. But God, and Frank Calabrese, he's running the mob tour up there in Chicago. I don't think he's doing it this summer, but he sure did last summer.
That's
Frank Galata, of course, he was all over the place. He was like, come and get me.
Yeah, you see Joe Pistone, who you can get in touch with him. You just tell him about his agent, and Phil Leonetti sort of keeps his head down.
He does. Leonetti does. He really does. I talked to Scott
Bernstein,
and he said, well, I can put you in touch with him, but he said a few things about him, and I decided, first of all, he was going to want money, and I'm not going to pay him money for interviews. Either do it for free or we'll promote their books or movies or whatever. But
you don't pay other people?
No, just you. You're the only one that gets paid.
That's right.
After I pay myself, after I make a profit.
Yeah, that's right.
Split it all with you.
That's right.
Oh, we haven't exactly made a profit. Well, folks, you listen to me. Help me make a profit. Send me some more donations on that donate button. Send them in the name of Cam.
That's right.
I'll give him every dime I get that you say this is in the name of Cam.
They're going to want money. They're going to want their money back.
I want their money back. Well, Cam, I appreciate it. That was a heck of a story. Doing all that research. It was a newer one, too. Yeah, it was a little bit newer, a little bit different sort of a guy. I actually had I think it was Frank Luna, who has been a supporter of the podcast, and he mentioned this, Chris Paciello, that we ought to look into him and do a story on him. So Frank, there you are. There's a story on Chris Paciello. I try to do things for people if they suggest them to me. Oh, Cam, be sure to take a look at our YouTube page on the Australian shows that we did. We've got some lady that's kind of trying to straighten us out. I think maybe we got a couple things wrong. So take a look at that. You'll find the comments interesting. I can't figure out if she's trying to. I can't figure out if she's trying to straighten us out or she's like just adding to the knowledge that we had up there. I couldn't remember enough, I guess, from what we did. I didn't have the notes in front of me, so.
I posted on the Australian boards. I said, we did the best we could. Excuse our funny accents.
Well, that's probably why all of a sudden I got a little action on the YouTube page. Yeah. So we got several comments. I got a bunch of comments over on those Australian things over the last couple of weeks. It seemed like. So you have to take a look at them. All right, Cam. I think that's all I got.
It was a good one. I appreciate it.
All right. You got anything else?
No, I think, like I said, we're coming out with some publications in 2021, the Underworld Killers, Kings, and Clowns for Chicago site. We've got tons of new pictures every day. The New York site is still building, Killers, Kings, and Clowns, the 5 families. And we've got a couple interviews coming up. We've got an interesting one that you and I spoke about earlier, trying to get Frank Calabrese's wife. So we'll see what we see.
Interesting. I just did a show. I don't know if it may come out. It may come out for this about a guy named, I just did this myself, John T. Ambrose. He was U.S. Marshal that during the Family Secrets trial, he was ratting out where Calabrese was and what they had in their files. It was pretty interesting. Yeah,
that was incredible. Even in the 2000s, you see Chicago with the guy. That guy was Marcello.
Really, he what's another kind of interesting little it's a small world is my friend Steve St. John was in Leavenworth with the Marquette 10, and the reason they cracked that, reason if the FBI cracked that and figured out who Ambrose was because of another wiretap they had, and they were getting information about the babysitter and something about Calabrese and the guy who's the babysitter. And then they talked about the Marquette 10. And so they put that together, the Marquette 10, and they named a couple of them. And I think somebody said something in that wiretap about it being some connection to the Marquette 10. So when they started looking into it, that was 10 policemen in Chicago who were shaking down bars, restaurant bars and on the north side there. And they all got a bunch of time. And Steve was in Leavenworth with a bunch of them up there. I may have to do a story on them. I'm not sure. I'd have to go research that and see just how interesting it was. But he's got some prison stories about policemen in prison. But so they put that together. And when they said the kids, talking about the kid being the guy who was talking to him, his father died in prison, and so when they look at all the Marquette 10, there's a guy whose name's Ambrose who died in prison, and there's one of the U.S. Marshals named Ambrose who's guarding Nick Calabrese. So it's a pretty fascinating story. It's kind of a shorty, but it's a fun story.
Constantly on the prowl, huh?
Yeah, always looking for stories, folks. So you got any suggestions? You got any resources? Know anybody that we ought to interview? I'm trying to get Sammy the Bull. I'm getting closer. I've got a guy that's talking to him. But I think he still wants money. He's into it for the money and into it for the big time with his own podcast. They haven't got it started yet. But I think he's got some kind of backers, so it'll be high production values and have the whole 9 yards, have a professional voice, be the interviewer, and then probably ask Sammy the Bull questions. I can't tell exactly what it's going to do, exactly how the format they're going to make. They haven't come up with the exact format, but it's out there and it's ready to go. But I got a guy working on him. He's telling him, you need to be on this guy in Kansas City's podcast, kind of promote your own.
That's right.
So, folks, I'll let you know when we get Sammy the Bull. If you do, you can thank Steve St. John for that. All right, Cam, good talking to you.
Good talking to you, Gary.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Okay.
That's good.
Let's stop this right now.
We'll put. I was kind of on the web the last 2 days, but I'll put some more